Let me list a bunch of names here and you have to tell me what they have in common, okay? Aristotle, Buddha, Confucius, Pythagoras, Socrates, and Eratosthenes. Was that how you pronounce his name? Eratosthenes? Whatever. Anyway, what do all those names have in common? They're sort of the archetype of a deep-thinking, high-meditating philosopher that writes books about the meaning of life and what it means to comprehend everything. For example, if I ask too many questions about, oh, what is the meaning of life, okay, they're going to be saying, ha! Who are you, Socrates, with all these questions? They're all the archetypal character of what I'm going to call a deep-thinking philosopher for the rest of this video, okay? Now, 4,000 years from now, are there going to be any deep-thinking philosophers referenced from our time, okay? Like, for example, like 3,000-4,000 years in the future, okay? If I put my hand up and said, hey, what's the meaning of life, too many times, they might ask, hey, who are you? Insert 21st century person here, with all these questions. Oh, like, oh, hey, who are you? Joe Rogan with all these questions? That was a joke. I don't have that much respect for Joe. If there's any, like, philosophers in the comment sections, can you, like, tell me about some famous philosophers that might be famous in 4,000 years? So, is there anybody alive now, okay, who, thousands of years from now, will be referenced as a deep-thinking philosopher stereotype character? Well, the answer to that question is no. And there are several reasons for that. The first reason is simply because back then it was a lot harder to get your work published, okay? Let's just go over the requirements for what it took to get a book published thousands of years ago. First of all, you had to know how to write, and you had to have access to the necessary writing materials, which already puts most people out of it. Next, you have to have connections in high places to get your book published. Presumably your book has to fit with the narrative the king wants to put, so if you write something mean about him, not going to get published. And then your book just has to survive the test of time. Those are all the things that are required, okay, before 3,000 years from now, people are referencing you as some caricature of a philosopher. Aristotle and all that. Nowadays, getting your word out is a lot easier. I'm not going to say that it's a universal thing, because it isn't, okay? You still need some baseline level of privilege, I think, to start videos. Like, for example, okay, I recently spent several days grinding away on a documentary about the 30 Years' War, which isn't that good, please don't go watch it. But the point I'm making here is that the vast majority of people in the world don't have that kind of time, okay? They can't just decide to throw away several days to make a video essay. So to make, like, proper video essays, you do need at least enough wealth that you have enough free time to actually do that stuff. And it's the same thing with writing books, okay? You do have to be able to devote a lot of time for it. Now, I'm not just bragging about how privileged I am here. I'm saying this to point out that society still has not progressed to the point that anybody can just say anything, okay? Not everyone even has internet access. But still, the number of people who can say stuff and get their word out there is a lot more than it was 1,000, 2,000 years ago. It used to be that a very small percentage at the top could write stuff. Now, pretty much anybody can make a tweet, and a lot of people can actually just make full-length video essays. The point I'm saying here is that there isn't going to be a 21st century Aristotle or Socrates that is remembered thousands of years from now, because, you know, fame and getting your word out there is so much less special. A lot more people can do it now, so if you're one of the people who can do that, no one's going to remember you. Versus my theory is that the reason all these authors from thousands of years ago are remembered is simply because they're one of the few people who actually could get their word out there. And this is a good thing, by the way. I'm not trying to imply that this is a bad thing. It also means that entertaining, or better yet, educational people are more likely to be able to do their entertainment and education on you, okay? If there's a funny person who's a comedian who existed, say, in the 80s, they couldn't really perform to any more than a crowd of people at a time, okay? Now they can perform to millions at a time, okay? An educator can make an essay that 33 million people will see nowadays. Society is better off because of this, and I want it to keep going. And I hope that one day we get to a point that everybody really can say everything. So that's the thing, pretty much no one from our era is going to be remembered in the future. There were just so many people with over 1 million subscribers, over 10 million subscribers, okay? You don't stand out anymore. Nowadays, if 5,000 people view my video, who cares? But back in the olden days, if 5,000 people buy your pamphlet, you've just started a Protestant Reformation. Nowadays, if 100,000 people subscribe to my channel, who cares? No one's ever heard of me. But 200 years ago, if 100,000 people buy my book, well, then I've just started communist revolutions all over the world. If I do really well, and somehow end up with 200 million subscribers, okay, but when I die, my legacy will last 4 or 5 generations after my life at the best. And that's good, you know, it means that nothing you do really has any long-term consequences, which, you know, is quite comforting, because whenever I've done something cringy or embarrassing, I'll be like, okay, nobody's going to remember this 100 years from now. It also means that it's basically impossible to make your legacy live on forever, okay? No matter what you do, no matter how famous you get, okay, it's going to be basically impossible to have people remember your name in the future. Now, there will be some lucky people who do escape the filter. Mr. Beast, maybe, okay? So there are probably a few people who are going to get remembered, but it's a much smaller percentage of all the famous people in the world, and a much smaller percentage of people in general. No matter how famous of a person you become, I highly doubt anyone will know who you are 200 years from now. But now let's take Jenna Marbles, for instance. 20 million subscribers. How many people do you think are going to remember her 100 years from now? Well, it pains me to say this, but sadly, I don't think anyone will. There is also a second reason why there isn't going to be a 21st century Buddha or a 21st century Confucius. It's because culture changes, okay? Culture was very different back then, and it'll be very different in the future, okay? We live in a culture, a brief era, which has this archetypal character, this stereotype of some Zen genius, deep-thinking philosopher who contemplates things like the meaning of life and what it means to truly exist. For all we know, that archetype, that stereotype, may not exist anymore. Perhaps they've moved on to other archetypal stereotypes.